The sun had just started dipping behind the horizon as I drove through the quiet suburban neighborhood where my son, Jason, lived with his wife, Melissa. I hadn't told him I was coming. Just felt like dropping by for a quick visit. We hadn't seen each other in a few weeks, and I missed him. Retirement had left me with more free time than I knew what to do with, and unannounced visits had become my way of staying connected. But as I turned onto his street and slowed near his driveway, I hit the brakes harder than I meant to. Parked right in front of Jason's house, as clear as day, was my wife's car, Linda's pearl white Lexus, the same one I'd bought her for our 30th anniversary last year. At first, I blinked, thinking maybe I'd gotten it wrong. Maybe it was a coincidence. But that car had a scratch on the rear left bumper. Same spot, same shape, no mistake. I just sat there in my own car for a minute, staring, confusion tightening my chest. Linda hadn't mentioned anything about coming here today. In fact, she told me this morning she was meeting her friend Carol for a late lunch, then heading to a gallery opening. Jason hadn't said a word about it either. Something felt off. I'd parked a few houses down so my car wouldn't be noticed, got out quietly, and walked toward the house. The front door was closed, and the curtains were drawn. My pulse picked up. I don't know why, maybe just instinct, but I didn't knock. Instead, I crept around the side of the house, where I knew the living room window was often left slightly cracked for air. I crouched low, careful not to make noise, and leaned in. That's when I heard it. Laughter. Two people. One definitely Linda, the other Jason. I strained to listen more. Their voices were too low to make out completely, but then I caught a sentence that nearly dropped me to my knees. Linda's voice, soft but smug. He still has no idea. Can you believe we pulled this off for so long? Jason chuckled in response. Old man's too busy playing retirement to notice what's right under his nose. My heart stopped. My wife and my son, together, hiding something, mocking me. And that's when everything began to unravel. I froze by the window, the words replaying in my mind like an echo chamber I couldn't escape from. Old man's too busy playing retirement. Can you believe we pulled this off for so long? The voices inside were relaxed, comfortable, as if my existence was nothing but a mild inconvenience to their secret little world. I couldn't move, couldn't blink. My knees were locked in place, my breath shallow. What were they talking about? An affair? Some money scheme? A lie that stretched further than I could imagine? I didn't know. All I knew was that my wife and my only son were united in something they had worked hard to keep hidden from me. I leaned in again, hoping to catch more. Inside, Jason was pouring wine. 2 glasses, both red. He handed one to Linda, who accepted it with a familiar smile. Not the kind you give your son. Something else. Something far too warm, too intimate. I pulled back from the window, bile rising in my throat. No, that couldn't be what I thought it was. It had to be something else. Something. Anything other than the possibility that the woman I had shared my life with for 35 years and the son I had raised and sacrificed everything for were involved in something unthinkable. My fists clenched as a storm surged inside me. Not rage yet, just confusion, shock, grief. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone, quickly switching the camera to video mode. With trembling fingers, I hit record and held the phone up to the window, capturing everything. Their faces, their words. Linda, sipping her wine, said, "He was never supposed to find out. This was supposed to be clean, over and done with." Jason smirked. "You worry too much. If he didn't figure it out when we sold off the last property, he's not going to now." Property? What property? I hadn't sold anything in over a year, and certainly not without knowing about it. Something deeper was happening here, and I'd only scratched the surface. I pocketed the phone and slowly backed away from the house. No confrontation, not yet. If they thought I was clueless, I'd play along. For now, let them believe I was the old man, with no idea what was going on. But I would uncover everything, and when I did, they'd both wish I had never heard a single word. I walked back to my car like a man moving through wet cement, slow, heavy, and completely hollow inside. My mind was racing, but my body was numb. I didn't look back at the house. I didn't want to see them laughing again. The same son whose scraped knees I used to clean. The same woman who once danced barefoot with me in the kitchen after we put him to bed. Now they were hiding something from me. Something big, and I had no idea how deep the rot went. I sat behind the wheel, my hands gripping the steering wheel as my knuckles turned white. I didn't start the engine right away. I just stared out through the windshield, the world blurring as thoughts collided inside my skull. What did they mean by sold off the last property? I racked my memory. Linda and I had owned several real estate investments, 2 rental homes, a lakefront cabin, and a few stocks we'd picked up years ago, but I hadn't checked any of those in months. She handled the finances ever since I retired, said it kept her busy, made her feel useful. I trusted her. I laughed to myself. Bitter and low. Trusted. That word tasted different now. I drove home in silence, the radio off, the windows up. The only sound was the steady drum of my heart pounding in my ears. The house felt colder when I stepped inside. I looked around. Our living room, the wedding photo on the mantle, the cozy throw blanket she always curled under when we watched movies. Everything felt fake now. A beautifully arranged lie. I poured myself a drink, neat scotch, something I hadn't touched in months, and sat in the dark. My phone buzzed. A text from Linda. Linda, gallery ran late. Grabbing dinner with Carol. Don't wait up. Love you. The boldness of it hit me like a punch. She was still lying, right after laughing about it in my son's living room. She even had the nerve to say, love you. I didn't reply. I didn't scream. Didn't throw the glass against the wall, though every nerve in my body begged for it. Instead, I sat down, opened my laptop, and began digging. If they were so sure I wouldn't notice, I'd show them how dangerous a quiet man with time on his hands could be. This wouldn't be an emotional outburst. This would be a methodical, brutal reckoning. I opened my laptop like a surgeon preparing for a high-stakes operation. Calm, focused, not a flicker of emotion on my face. The betrayal still throbbed in my chest, but I had already started compartmentalizing it. I wasn't going to lose my temper. I was going to gather evidence. I was going to bury them both, slowly. I started with the financial records. Linda and I shared joint access to our investment portfolio, but I hadn't logged in since last year. Retirement had softened my instincts. I let her take care of it. That was my first mistake. Password, login, 2-factor code. Everything still worked. That was my second surprise. When the dashboard loaded, I stared at the numbers. My eyes scanned the transactions, and slowly, a picture began to form. Properties sold, accounts closed, funds moved. Some of the transfers went to accounts I didn't recognize, offshore, private banks, but the amounts? 6 figures at a time, hundreds of thousands, gone. And then I saw it. One transaction stood out like a neon sign. $275,000 wired to a personal account under the name Jason Mitchell. My son? They weren't just lying. They were robbing me, draining everything I'd built over a lifetime. It wasn't just betrayal anymore. It was a conspiracy, and it had been going on for months, maybe years. I leaned back in my chair, closed my eyes, and let the reality settle. Linda was using my name, my trust, my love to funnel money to our son behind my back. Jason, my blood, was helping her, benefiting from it, mocking me over wine like I was nothing more than a senile fool waiting to be cleaned out. The rage finally rose, but it didn't boil over. It crystallized into something sharper, colder, more dangerous. I picked up my phone and opened the voice memos app. August 4th, 9:43 p.m. Beginning a personal log. Evidence of financial fraud and marital betrayal involving Linda Mitchell and Jason Mitchell. Transactions traced to offshore accounts. Subject matter recorded discreetly at Jason's residence. Plan in motion. I will not confront them yet. I want to see how far they'll go. I saved the file and backed it up to a cloud drive they didn't know existed. I wasn't just collecting evidence. I was building a case. They'd chosen to play games behind my back, but they forgot the first rule of betrayal. Never underestimate the man who taught you everything you know. The next morning, I woke before the sun. I hadn't slept, not really, just lay in bed staring at the ceiling fan, hearing Linda's voice again and again. He still has no idea. She was still asleep in the next room. I could hear her soft breathing, peaceful, as if nothing was wrong, as if she hadn't spent the night drinking wine with our son, laughing at how gullible I was. I moved quietly through the house, avoiding the creaky floorboards. This was an old skill. I'd used it back when Jason was a baby, and I didn't want to wake him. Now I was using it to avoid the woman who once swore to grow old with me. My destination, the basement. Years ago, when Linda and I bought this house, I had a small safe installed behind the utility shelves, just a modest one. At the time, It held our passports, extra keys, and the emergency cash stash. Over time, Linda forgot it existed. She never liked the basement much. Too dusty for her tastes. I pulled away the shelf and revealed the wall panel. A slight twist, and the lock clicked open. Inside the safe, still wrapped in the original plastic binder, were files I hadn't looked at in years. Property deeds, notarized agreements, purchase contracts from before Jason had even finished college. Everything was in my name. Everything we had built together. But that was the thing. Now, those documents weren't just papers. They were leverage. I started scanning each page into a portable document scanner I kept nearby. Every scan saved to a new hidden cloud folder. I wasn't just protecting what was left. I was preparing to weaponize it. Halfway through the pile, I found something that stopped me. A document I didn't remember signing. One transferring co-ownership of the lake cabin to Jason. My signature was on it. But I knew, in the deepest part of my bones, that I never signed it. I'd just found my first piece of forgery. I snapped a photo of the signature and pulled up old legal documents with my actual signature. The difference was subtle, but clear. Linda had always been good at details. Apparently, she thought she was good enough to fake my hand too. Now I had proof. This wasn't just betrayal. It was fraud, in the legal sense. And when the time came, I wouldn't just destroy their lives emotionally. I'd make sure they answered to the law. When I came back upstairs, the scent of coffee had already filled the kitchen. Linda stood at the counter, humming to herself as she stirred creamer into her mug, like nothing had happened. Like we were still the couple who spent lazy Sundays watching classic films and arguing about who made better pancakes. She turned and smiled at me, dressed in a robe and slippers like the perfect housewife. "Morning, honey. You were up early. Everything okay?" Her tone was soft, casual, not a hint of guilt. I forced a smile. "Yeah, just couldn't sleep. Figured I'd get an early start on some garage cleanup." She walked over and kissed my cheek like she had 1,000 times before. I didn't flinch, but inside, I wanted to wash my face with fire. "I'm heading to brunch with Carol again," she said, sipping her coffee. "She wants me to help plan her daughter's baby shower. I might be out most of the day." I nodded, playing dumb. "Tell her congrats." Brunch with Carol. Again, same story, different day. How many lies had been wrapped inside those casual brunches? And more importantly, how long had she been building this facade? "You okay?" she asked, tilting her head slightly. She always had a knack for reading micro-expressions. I shrugged, then chuckled softly. "Just feeling old today." She laughed and touched my arm. "You? Never. You're still sharp as ever." I watched her eyes closely. That was her tell. Flattery. She used it when she was hiding something. I had mistaken it for affection for years. Now I saw it for what it was. Camouflage. After she left, I waited exactly 5 minutes, then got into my truck and followed from a distance. She didn't go to Carol's. She drove to the same neighborhood, Jason's. Again, she parked her car on the same side of the street and walked inside the house like she belonged there. No hesitation, no knocking. I parked farther away and started filming from my dashboard camera. Time-stamped, clear angle. This wasn't about gathering proof anymore. I had that. This was about understanding their rhythm. When they met, how often, how long, and most importantly, what exactly they were plotting next. Because the more I watched, the more I realized this wasn't about love. It wasn't even about betrayal. It was about taking everything I had and leaving me with nothing. And I wasn't about to let that happen. After an hour of watching Linda's car remain parked outside Jason's home, I had seen enough. For today, I didn't need more footage. What I needed now was a plan. One that wouldn't just expose them, but destroy the safety net they thought they built for themselves. That's when I thought of Peter Hayes. Peter and I served together in the Army back in the 80s. After we got out, he became a private investigator, and over the years, he'd helped me dig into a few tricky situations involving tenants and business partners. We hadn't spoken in a while, but this was too big to handle alone. I called him as I drove. He picked up on the third ring. "Mitchell? Damn! It's been years. What brings the ghost of Fort Benning back to life?" I didn't waste time. "I need your help, Pete, and I need it off the books." There was a pause. Then his voice dropped a notch. "Serious?" "Very." We met at a small diner on the edge of town where nobody would recognize either of us. He looked older, grayer, with a slight limp that I hadn't remembered, but his eyes were still sharp. I slid the phone across the table and let him watch the video I'd recorded from outside Jason's house. He didn't say a word until the end. Then he leaned back, crossed his arms, and exhaled. Jesus, Daniel, that's your wife and son. Yeah, and that's just the surface. They've been transferring money, forging documents. I think they're trying to siphon everything before I catch on. Peter rubbed his chin. You want me to dig? Dig. Find everything. I want to know where the money went, who helped them, how deep this goes, and if there's more I haven't found. He nodded slowly. All right, but you know what this means, right? If this goes legal, it'll be ugly. You'll be dragging your own family into court. I looked him dead in the eye. They stopped being my family the second they betrayed me. Peter slid a notepad out of his jacket. Then let's bury them properly. We made a list. Banks to trace, documents to verify, contacts to interview discreetly. Peter promised to start with a forged deed to the lake house. I paid for the coffee, left a generous tip, and walked out with a clarity I hadn't felt in days. This wasn't just revenge anymore. It was justice, and I was just getting started. The next step of my plan required bait, and it had to be subtle. Something that wouldn't raise alarms, but would let me see just how far they were willing to go. I returned home that evening, sat at my desk, and opened a new email account under a fake name, one that Linda wouldn't recognize. Then I crafted a carefully worded message and sent it to her personal inbox. Subject: interested in a quick cash buyout of your lake property? Dear Mrs. Mitchell, I'm an independent buyer looking for secluded cabins near Lake Hazel for an all-cash purchase. Your name came up in county records as a co-owner of one such property. If you're interested in selling quickly and discreetly, I'm willing to offer above market value. Please respond with details or contact info if interested. Confidentiality guaranteed. James Carter. I smirked as I hit send. Why? Because according to every document I had scanned, Linda wasn't legally a co-owner of that cabin. I was. Only me. That forged document naming Jason never filed with the county. They had intended to make it look official, but the paper trail ended at a fake notary stamp. This email would be the hook. If Linda responded and tried to claim ownership, she'd be committing yet another layer of fraud, this time in writing. A few hours later, she replied, Linda Mitchell. Hi, James. I may be interested in a private sale. I co-own the cabin with my husband, but I handle most of our real estate. What kind of price are we talking? I leaned back in my chair, smiling coldly. She'd taken the bait. Now I had evidence of intent. She claimed ownership she didn't legally have. She was attempting to sell it without my knowledge, even lying to an outside party, and I had it all documented. I forwarded the message chain to Peter with a note. Proof of intent to defraud. Stack it on top of the others. Within 10 minutes, he replied. Got it. This just became a case of attempted real estate fraud. I'll loop in my legal contact to get eyes on this quietly. Everything was moving into place, but I wasn't done. I wanted to know how Linda was getting into our accounts, how Jason was involved so comfortably, and who else might be helping them behind the scenes. So I planted another trap. This time, inside our home, a hidden voice recorder tucked in the living room, activated by sound. Because if Linda had the audacity to keep lying to my face, I wanted to hear it. Every single word. 3 days passed. I kept everything normal. Smiled when she smiled, nodded when she spoke, kissed her cheek before bed. I played the devoted husband perfectly. But every time Linda left the house, I retrieved the tiny voice recorder hidden behind the antique clock on our living room shelf. It was voice activated, just as I had planned, and by the second night, it had captured exactly what I was hoping for. I closed the door to my study, inserted the micro SD card into my laptop, and hit play. There was silence for the first few minutes. Then the front door creaked open. Footsteps, a shuffle of keys. Linda's voice, tired and annoyed. He's still clueless. Acted like he didn't notice I was gone half the day. Another voice came next, one that stopped my breath cold. Jason. You sure he hasn't been poking around? Not a chance, Linda said. I know how to keep him off balance. He still thinks Carol and I go on lunch dates twice a week. If only he knew Carol moved to Arizona 2 months ago. I paused the audio. My pulse thudded in my ears. Carol was her alibi, her oldest friend, and she wasn't even in the state anymore. I continued playing. Jason again. The lawyer says we should move fast. The offshore account's ready. One last transfer, and we're clear. You'll file after, right? Of course, Linda replied. Let him sign the divorce papers after we've drained it all. He can keep the house. He'll need somewhere to cry. I clenched my fists, fingernails digging into my palms. They weren't just lying to me. They were planning to leave me with nothing. They'd already stolen most of our assets. Now they wanted to vanish, dump me, and disappear with the rest. But they weren't counting on one thing, me listening. I clipped the audio files and labeled them with timestamps. Then I backed them up in multiple places. Cloud, USB, external hard drive. I wasn't taking chances. I even created a folder labeled for attorney use only and encrypted it. I sent a copy to Peter with a message. They're preparing for a final withdrawal and offshore exit. Divorce is part of the plan. I'm not going to stop them. Yet, let's see where they run to. His reply came fast. Understood. Let them think they're winning. I'm watching the account activity now. I leaned back, heart pounding, but mind sharper than ever. Let them run their con. Let them think they'd won. I wasn't going to stop them from going through with it, because when they did, they'd fall into the trap I'd already built. Sitting in my quiet house, surrounded by evidence, I realized that this wasn't just about money or betrayal anymore. It was about my dignity, about reclaiming the life they tried to steal. I spent hours drafting an outline for how and when to confront them. Timing was everything. If I acted too soon, they'd cover their tracks. Too late, and I'd lose my leverage. I mapped out a strategy. 1. Expose the financial fraud. With Peter's help, gather undeniable proof that Linda and Jason had illegally transferred and hidden assets. 2. Trigger a legal audit. Initiate a quiet investigation without alerting them. 3. Create tension between them. Subtle moves to sow distrust. 4. Arrange a family meeting the day I would reveal everything, watching their carefully constructed lies crumble. I also realized I needed allies, people who could back me up and make sure the truth was undeniable. I contacted a trusted family lawyer, Claire Reynolds, known for her no-nonsense approach to messy divorces and financial disputes. Claire agreed to meet the following day. Before bed, I prepared a folder with all the evidence, the recordings, bank statements, forged documents, and videos. I told myself this was not just about revenge. This was about justice, and I would make sure it hurt. But beneath the calm exterior, a cold fire burned. I knew Linda and Jason would never see it coming. The next morning, Claire Reynolds greeted me with a firm handshake and a piercing gaze. She was a woman who had seen every kind of betrayal imaginable, broken trusts, shattered families, and bitter battles over money and love. As I laid out the evidence, her expression shifted from professional interest to genuine concern. "This is extensive," she said quietly. "You've got forged documents, covert transfers, and recorded conversations that could bring down both your wife and son in court." I nodded. "I want to make sure they can't weasel out of this. I want a plan that hits hard, but also protects me." Claire smiled, but it wasn't a warm smile. It was the kind that promised fire and fury. "I can help you build a case that leaves them with nothing. But this will get ugly, Daniel. You're prepared for that?" I didn't hesitate. "They stopped being my family the moment they betrayed me." She took out her phone and began drafting the initial paperwork. "First, we file a petition to freeze all joint assets. Then, we notify the relevant financial institutions. We'll work with your PI to trace the offshore accounts." Her words gave me a strange sense of relief. For the first time, I felt like I had an army behind me. But as we wrapped up, Claire looked me in the eye. "Remember, Daniel, revenge is a double-edged sword. You have to be ready for the fallout." I smiled thinly. "I'm not afraid of the fallout." As she left, I sat back and let the weight of what was to come settle in. The battlefield was set, and I was ready. Days passed, and I watched the slow unraveling begin. Peter called with updates. Offshore accounts frozen. Suspicious transactions flagged. Phone records tracing calls to unknown associates. Linda and Jason were getting nervous, I could tell. Then one evening, I received a call from Jason himself. His voice was strained, but he tried to sound casual. "Dad, can we talk? Alone?" Something about the way he said it sent a cold shiver down my spine. I agreed to meet him the next day at a neutral cafe downtown. When I arrived, Jason was already there, sitting stiffly with his hands clenched. He avoided my eyes. "Dad," he began, "I know you found out. I want to explain." I held up a hand. "Save it. I don't want your excuses." He sighed, then said quietly, "Linda said you were going to ruin us. She's scared, Dad. She says you're planning to take everything." I leaned forward. "You think I want to ruin my own family? No. I want to expose the lies, the theft, the betrayal." Jason looked away, ashamed. "It doesn't have to end like this, Dad. We can work something out." I laughed bitterly. "Work something out? After everything? No, Jason. This ends the way it has to justice." I stood and left, feeling the weight of a fractured family heavier than ever. Back at home, I realized I needed more inside information to strengthen my case. Someone close, but who wouldn't betray me? Then I remembered Emily, Jason's wife's younger sister. She was always kind to me, often visiting on weekends. Quiet, observant, and honest. I called her under the guise of a friendly catch-up. "Emily, it's Daniel. I hope you're doing well." She sounded surprised but happy to hear from me. We talked about trivial things at first, but I steered the conversation gently. "Listen, Emily, I need to ask you something important. Is there anything you've noticed? Anything unusual with Melissa and Jason? Anything I should know about?" There was a pause. Then she said quietly, "I've suspected for a while that Melissa isn't who she pretends to be. She hides things from the family, especially from Jason. I think she's involved in some shady business." I nodded silently, even though she couldn't see me. "Thanks for trusting me, Emily. If you hear anything, please tell me," she promised she would. Having an insider gave me renewed hope. I wasn't completely alone in this war. With Emily's help, Peter was able to dig deeper into Melissa's background. What we uncovered wasn't just disturbing, it was explosive. Melissa had ties to a small but notorious fraud ring, operating under the radar for years. Fake identities, money laundering, shell companies, the works. Suddenly, the pieces fit. Linda's repeated trips to see Jason, the offshore accounts, the forged documents, they were all part of a much larger con. Jason, it seemed, was the unwitting pawn, or perhaps complicit in some ways. But Melissa? She was the spider weaving the web. Armed with this information, I felt a cold satisfaction. The house of cards was shaking. I shared the new findings with Claire and Peter. They were impressed and cautious. "This changes everything," Claire said. "You're not just fighting family betrayal anymore. You're exposing a criminal enterprise." I nodded. "And I want every bit of it brought into the light." The next steps were clear. We had to act fast before they caught on and disappeared. Late one evening, as I was reviewing files, there was a soft knock on the front door. I wasn't expecting anyone. I opened it to find Emily standing there, looking anxious. "Daniel, I had to come," she said quietly. "There's something you need to know. Something dangerous." She stepped inside, eyes darting around nervously. "I overheard a conversation between Melissa and Linda. They're planning to move some of the money to another offshore account, one even harder to trace, and there's talk of disappearing for good." I listened intently as she continued. "They think you don't know, but they're speeding things up." Her words sent a chill down my spine. Time was running out, but I wasn't going down without a fight. With Emily's warning ringing in my ears, I gathered Claire and Peter to strategize our next move. We needed to catch Linda and Jason red-handed during their next attempt to move the funds. Peter suggested monitoring their communications and financial transactions closely, while Claire prepared legal motions to freeze any new transfers immediately. I arranged for hidden cameras at Jason's house with Peter's help to document any suspicious activity. Days later, the trap was set. One evening, I received a call from Peter. "They're making a move tonight. The transfer is scheduled in less than an hour." I sat silently, heart pounding but focused. As the clock ticked, I watched the cameras and listened to live feeds Peter provided. When Linda and Jason appeared, laptops in hand, executing the transfer, I felt a surge of triumph. Peter acted fast, notifying banks and authorities to block the transaction. The look on their faces when the transfer was frozen would be priceless. The morning after the failed transfer was electric with tension. Peter's informant reported that Linda and Jason were furious, shouting at each other behind closed doors. The cracks in their alliance were beginning to show. I stayed calm, knowing the unraveling had only just begun. Claire arranged for a court order to freeze all remaining joint assets. Linda called me that afternoon, her voice trembling. "Daniel, we need to talk. Please, can we meet?" I agreed, sensing the perfect opportunity. We met at a neutral cafe, the same place I'd met Jason. Linda's facade was cracked. Her confidence was gone. She tried to play the victim, claiming she was forced into the scheme by Jason, that she loved me all along. I listened patiently, the betrayal still fresh, but now replaced by cold resolve. "Linda," I said firmly, "there's no coming back from this. You and Jason chose this path. Now you must face the consequences." As I walked away, I felt the bitter satisfaction of a man who had taken back what was rightfully his. The next day, I confronted Jason once again, but this time on my terms. We met at my house, where I had all the evidence laid out. Photos, documents, audio recordings. His face turned pale as I methodically presented the proof. "Jason, this isn't just about money. It's about trust. You and your mother have shattered it," he stammered, trying to explain, but I cut him off. "I've contacted the authorities. Your actions have consequences far beyond this family." For the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. It was the moment I realized that the power had shifted. No longer the betrayed father, but the one holding the cards. With the legal case building and the authorities involved, Linda and Jason grew desperate. They tried to reach me, begging for mercy, promising to make amends. But I was unmoved. I knew their guilt ran deeper than words could heal. Instead, I focused on securing my future, ensuring every penny stolen would be returned. I worked closely with Claire and Peter to finalize the case. The day came when the judge signed the court order that permanently stripped Linda and Jason of their claims to our assets. Justice wasn't just served, it was inevitable. Months later, the dust had settled. Linda and Jason were gone, legal battles behind them, their reputations ruined. I stood alone in my house, the silence both comforting and heavy, but I felt free. Free from lies, from betrayal, from the weight of their deception. I had reclaimed my life, not through anger, but through patience, strategy, and quiet strength. Now, it was time to rebuild, to find peace, to live for myself. Because sometimes, the greatest revenge is simply moving forward.